Welcome back to my study. Before we begin this third part of our analysis, it's essential that you have the full context of this case. This video serves as the third installment of an investigation into the mechanics of conflict and pathologization. If you haven't yet, please pause here and watch my previous two uploads in order. First, Rodberry fans' serious questions for Super Godzilla 12, and second, Beyond the Critique, why vulnerability shapes our worldview. You can find the links to both in the description below. They are the bedrock of the evidence I'm presenting today, and the case I'm building here will not make sense without that foundation. Hello, Super Godzilla 12. It's me, the Orion broadcast. I am addressing you directly to discuss a phenomenon that has defined our conflict, the pathologization of personal preferences. This is a practice I was taught during my own youth, one I unfortunately internalized and mirrored during our initial interaction in the spring of 2011, when I was operating under the username of Rodberry Fan. In this study, I will elaborate on my own history of being pathologized and acknowledge how your response to my behavior at the time did not serve to correct the issue. Rather, it severely postponed my ability to realize that one does not need to get over their strongly held dislikes to achieve maturity. I will demonstrate why the punitive shaming I received and subsequently participated in is a deeply flawed, pernicious lesson, by reflecting on how my foster family and I should have handled my childhood misunderstandings with evidence rather than punishment. I hope to offer a clearer, more objective path for how we engage with dissenting opinions today. Super Godzilla 12. I'm addressing our 2011 history to dissect the mechanics of our conflict. Looking back at our initial interaction, it is clear that your response to my outbursts was not a move towards resolution, but a doubling down on punitive hostility, a reaction that was, in many ways, more destructive than my own initial impulsive attempt to force you to get over your hatred for the Lion King. For years, you and your proxies demanded that I let it go and get over my past, while you yourselves remained tethered to an ongoing resentment that fueled a multi-year harassment campaign against me. As I revealed in my previous video, I was acting under the influence of a deeply self-invalidating framework. I had been taught by my foster family that intense dislikes were fanaticisms or symptoms of mental illness, and I wrongly projected that framework onto you. When I saw you endorsing Confused Matthew's May 2008 original Lion King review, a piece I viewed as mean-spirited and punitive in its desire to see young Simba beaten up, I reacted with the same toxic, reductive, Hitler comparisons I had been conditioned to use by my late foster mother. I was operating under the reductio ad Hitlerum fallacy, a tool of shaming I had unfortunately internalized. I also feared that you were fostering a hostile environment where Lion King fans were mocked as idiots, a concern shared by others like Savage Broadcast, who also criticized the immaturity of Confused Matthew's then punitive rhetoric of beating up Simba. I fully acknowledge the garbage nature of my 2011 language. I regretted those comparisons by early 2012, once you finally disclosed that you had a close friend, John Man 418, who loved The Lion King. However, in the spirit of accountability, I must analyze what should have happened. Instead of flaming your comment section of your Lion King 2 review, I should have asked you direct, concerned questions regarding your endorsement of Confused Matthew's call for vengeance against a fictional character, and suggested more rigorous critiques, such as the legitimate biological and ecological objections to the Lion King's speciesism against hyenas, which were backed by scientific evidence rather than mere spite. Furthermore, I should have articulated that my issue was not with the film's quality, but with the hostile, anti-intellectual rhetoric being championed in its critique. But you chose a different path. you gleefully mocked my outbursts for the sake of self-aggrandizing commentary, kicking off a drama bandwagon that lasted until 2018. You had the opportunity in 2011 to diffuse the entire situation. If you had simply acted with transparency, if you had questioned my behavior and mentioned Jawman 418, the trajectory would have been fundamentally different. I would have explained the true origin of my volatility, the fact that I had been taught to view my own intense aversions as a sickness by my foster parents. Had that conversation occurred, it would have triggered the realization that my late foster mother's teachings were fundamentally flawed right smack in 2011. Instead, by choosing schadenfreude over accountability, you solidified my commitment to that get-over-it framework for more than another decade. That delay was the direct catalyst for why I am now grappling with a Drej Endgame fantasy that I have today. Your drama put far more stress on a dam of self-restraint that I built against my own violent impulses regarding Naboo by holding back the necessary process of my self-validation. When that dam finally broke earlier this year, the resentment had already festered into the extreme, destructive counter-narratives I am now working to archive and dismantle. Super Godzilla 12. I want to address the root of the pathologization of taste by analyzing two samples from my own personal history. The first one occurred on Saturday, August 26, 1995. I was 11 and a half years old, preparing for Special Olympic swim practice, watching Saturday morning cartoons on CBS. During the commercial breaks for the upcoming Saturday Mornings Are Smoky lineup, I saw decontextualized clips for the Lion King's Timon Pumbaa show. Based on my sensitivity to environmental issues and poaching, I misinterpreted two back-to-back clips. I saw Timon Pumbaa interacting with a panda and, lacking the actual episode context, I honestly believe I saw them killing the animal. My reaction was a genuinely felt altruistic, if factually incorrect, outrage. When I told my foster mother that I refused to watch the show, she became upset, asserting that they were actually saving the pandas. However, she relied on hearsay rather than providing the evidence, the episode itself, that would have corrected my error. When I continued to hold my position, she grounded me in timeout for the rest of the day, threatening to report me to Disney for dragging good guys through the mud later that year. That experience was a formative failure of communication. My foster parents refused to record the episode Don't Break the China, which would have provided the only thing that could have changed my mind at the time: the receipts. Instead, they pathologized my misunderstanding as a sickness or fanaticism, and in doing so, they forced me to internalize the toxic idea that was inherently wrong to critique protagonist characters. Later, I project that same flawed teaching onto you during our spring 2011 dispute, shaming you for seeing characters as bad when they made you uncomfortable. I have since learned that if one possesses logic and evidence, one can and should critique supposed good guys. For instance, rather than the mean-spirited rhetoric used by Confused Matthew in his faulty review of The Lion King, one can objectively prove that Mufasa and Simba act as speciesist bullies who condemn hyenas to starvation, a reality backed by hyena biologists from UC Berkeley who unsuccessfully urged Disney to avoid the defamatory portrayal of the species upon the film's release. My foster parents' pathologization of my genuine misunderstanding didn't make me better. It made me more volatile. It fueled years of punitive fantasies and temper tantrums because my confusion was treated as a moral failing rather than a lack of information. If you want to be a rigorous critic, you must learn from my trajectory. Number 1. Reserve your critiques for facts. Replace faulty assumptions with documented evidence such as the Kimba controversy, the documented speciesism against hyenas, or the dangers of blind obedience to authority, rather than relying on punitive remarks about beating up characters one doesn't like. Number 2. Stop pathologizing misunderstanding. Treat confusion as a natural response to a lack of data, not a character flaw. My foster family should have simply recorded that episode and shown me the truth. You, likewise, should have engaged with the evidence rather than drama. The lesson is simple. Do your research, show your proof, and stop treating dissent as a disease. Super Godzilla 12. I want to address the core of my own history with Star Wars. A history defined by self-gaslighting and the forced suppression of my own systemizing, engineering-focused identity. My exposure began on Saturday, October 27th, 1990, during a trip to Disneyland for my 7th birthday 2 days earlier. While Space Mountain aligned with my love of physics, Star Tours immediately offended my sense of systemizing and engineering. The Starspeeder 3000 design felt structurally nonsensical, and the Death Star, a planet-killing thing with a circle in the center, as I called it at the time, instilled a profound sense of foreboding that I could not yet articulate. My wise foster brother, only 2 years my senior, saw what I was struggling to hide. He warned me to avoid Star Wars for my own sanity. Unfortunately, I did not heed that warning, and it was a mistake that proved detrimental to my long-term mental well-being. By engaging with Star Wars while my identity as an aspiring astronomer and space enthusiast was first forming, I left myself vulnerable to the hero's journey narrative that consistently pathologized the very systemizing engineering that defined me. I should have listened to my foster brother and stuck to Star Trek, which I discovered via The Next Generation at age 8, as it offered a reassuring, logical framework that never demanded that I dismantle my own identity to enjoy the story. My passion for realistic interstellar spacecraft design, as in Project Orion, Project Daedalus, and the Bussard Ramjet, became the zenith of my intellectual life in the late 1990s. These designs were the rational antithesis to the physics-defying aesthetics of Star Wars. The conflict peaked starting in February 18, 1999, when I designed my own Project Orion II, a hybrid propulsion concept using the propulsion of Project Daedalus for a Project Orion design meant to respect the 1963 Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. I used this concept as a psychological scepter, a way to defend my identity against the exclusionary tropes of the X-Wings. I see a direct parallel between my experiences and your alleged experiences. Just as my foster mother pathologized my opposition to Star Wars for her own comfort, evidence, including testimony from Ned John and your history with John Man 4 and 8, suggests that your own parents might have pathologized your dislike for the Lion King. If true, we are both victims of a system that views dissent as a pathology to be silenced. The difference, SG-12, is that I am now archiving the record and unlearning that pernicious lesson. I'm no longer pathologizing my own dislikes, but rather analyzing them as a part of a sovereign identity. It is time you did the same and moved past this bitter, drama-obsessed internet persona. The 20-week confiscation of my Orion II model, March 21st until August 8th, 1999, coincided precisely with the release of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, because I was being punished for my disdain for the Star Wars brand like the X-Wings, while simultaneously being forced to consume this imagery. My resentment became hyper-focused on the planet Naboo. My grievance with Naboo is specific. It centers on the Jaws effect-flavored speciesist persecution of the Colo Clawfish as a perceived scourge, somehow deserving of violent consumption by a regal felid savior, mammal chauvinist speciesist fossil known as the Sando Aqua Monster. Had The Phantom Menace been a standalone story outside of the Star Wars franchise, I would have voiced my critique of this persecution civilly. To demonstrate this, I'm currently developing a non-binary trans-feminine Colo Clawfish character named Stevie Siren. Their story will be released as transformative fanfiction on DeviantArt and Archive of Our Own, serving as proof that without the oppressive weight of the Star Wars connection, my engagement with the material is inherently creative, not destructive. But because Naboo is tethered to Star Wars, and because the deprivation of my Orion II concept forced me into a defensive, reactionary stance, I eventually escalated towards the Drej Endgame this year, a fantasy of the Drej mothership pulverizing Naboo. This is an attempt to punish the planet for its speciesism while simultaneously venting against the Star Wars franchise for acting as a vehicle for my foster mother's punitive shaming. I take full accountability for my part in this. In 2005, when my foster mother finally suggested that I stop trying to watch Star Wars, I should have recognized that I had the agency to disengage years earlier. I failed to question her 1990s teachings because they had become too deeply ingrained at the time. Had my Orion II model not been confiscated in 1999, I would have retained the autonomy to walk away from the franchise, and she, in turn, would have eventually accepted my boundaries. Furthermore, Super Godzilla 12, you had a singular opportunity to alter this trajectory of mine. You came close to exposing the absurdity of my late foster mother's 1990s teachings, but instead of using your platform to question my behavior or diffuse attention, as you could have by mentioning your friend John Man 418, you chose to mock me for self-aggrandizement. You had the power to ignite a real conversation about the pathologization of taste 15 years ago. It took me until this year to finally develop a Drej Endgame, as proven by my long-standing dislike of Titan, which you are familiar with. Therefore, my self-invalidation would have been dismantled and the Drej Endgame prevented 15 years in advance through a simple human dialogue 15 years ago. But sadly, that wasn't the case. I'm now moving beyond that era. I am returning to my original pre-Naboo essence as of this recording. I am taking concrete steps to undo the Drej Endgame, weaning myself off of this obsessive focus and channeling my critiques into the transformative stories of characters like Stevie Sauer and Nicolo Clawfish. I'm reclaiming my identity from the mechanisms that once sought to pathologize it. The lesson to take home from this particular video is twofold. First, we must stop gaslighting ourselves into enjoying media and entertainment that fundamentally contradicts our values or identities. For me, that meant finally acknowledging that my attempt to fit in with the Star Wars fan base was an act of self-betrayal that only bred resentment and spiraled into the destructive 2026 Drej Endgame fantasies I've just launched and I am now starting to work on dismantling. Second, we must cease the pathologization of dissent, whether it's dismissing someone's strong dislike for Star Wars as mental illness or shaming someone for merely criticizing The Lion King. This behavior is a fundamental failure of communication. It ignores the fact that strong dislikes are often rooted in personal history, unmet needs, or, as in my own case, a natural systemizing reaction to narrative inconsistency or poor design. When we pathologize those feelings, we don't hear the critic, we only push them towards the very bitterness and punitive rhetoric that creates toxic online environments. To those in positions of influence, when you are confronted by a harsh critic, the path forward is not found in schadenfreude or in rallying a drama bandwagon to silence dissent. The path forward is found in radical transparency. Simply ask the questions you are afraid to ask. Mention your own context, acknowledge your own influences, and engage with the substance of the critique rather than the tone of delivery. Mockery is a tool of someone who is afraid of being wrong. Genuine dialogue is a tool of someone who is confident in their own truth. I've spent years trapped in a cycle of punitive shaming, both as a victim and as a participant. I'm choosing now to close that chapter, to archive the data, and to finally focus on the work that is truly mine. My record is clear, my inquiry is documented, and I am moving forward.